Guten Abend. Oder sagt man hier in Österreich, Grüß Gott. Ja? Ich kann Deutsch sprechen, aber ich war in Berlin vor 5 oder 6 Jahren. Und ich habe auch in Deutschland gearbeitet, aber mein Deutsch ist so schlecht geworden, dann ist es viel besser, wenn ich spreche Englisch. Und dann, ich glaube, das ist okay mit alle hier. Und thank you so much to those there in the back that will do the translation. I've spoken before with simultaneous translation. Usually I speak so fast, but after a few seconds you see them banging on the glass there, saying, please slow down. So feel free to do that if I speak too fast, but I'll try and speak as slowly as I can. The problem is that I don't want you to fall asleep. And since I'm speaking about numbers, and if I do it slowly, then we may have a problem. So I put this shirt on, just in case. Those of you that fall asleep, here's the message. As simple as this. We have to get rid of this. Bruttoinlandsproblem, nicht Bruttoinlandsprodukt. This GDP, gross domestic problem. It's become a cage. It's become a prison. And unless we break the prison, we cannot build the world that we need, let alone the world that we want. So rather than an indicator of what we should try and build, this has become an indicator of what we do not want anymore. So, and one other thing, the main reason why we want you to put the names on the sheet of paper where you're going to write questions, because we want to punish those that ask questions that are not nice. Okay? So, you will see this presentation is a set of pictures. I'm a professor of economics, but I realized that every time I put numbers or equations on the slides, I lose 50 to 60% of my audience. So you will only see one equation, which is going to be surrounded by a lot of nice pictures. And it's going to be pretty. So let me start. Okay, the title of my presentation is Stop GDP, and let's build something else, what I call the well-being economy. The well-being economy can be built. We have all the tools to do that. All we need is to stop obsessing with GDP, with the gross domestic product, and start measuring new things that can help us build the different things that we need to have a well-being economy. But before I do this, I presume some of you, probably all of you, have heard at least once in their lives the Bruttoinlandsprodukt. How many of you have never, ever heard this acronym? No, they're great. So, but how many of you know when it was invented, for instance? Usually, ask economists, and very few of them have any idea of when it was invented. Would you like to guess? Those of you that haven't read my book, because if you have read my book, it's on page 6. But if you haven't read my book, would you like to guess? For instance, do you think that when Jesus Christ was here, the GDP had already been invented? Or was it after Jesus? Was it BC or AD? You can just shout, but shout very loudly because I cannot hear you.
Around 1930.
The 1930s, he's read the book. You will. So, actually GDP is very recent. It is very recent. It's been with us for 81 years. Okay? And usually what happens to things that become 80 of age, in Austria, even before you turn 80, you do what? If you're 80 years old, you are retired, right? You go. You let somebody else do the job. And I think GDP has come to the point of retirement. We need something better. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the history of GDP, because it's really, really interesting. And it's full of political conflict. So GDP was invented in 1934. Okay? This was a time in which there was a crisis like the one in which we still live. And it was called the Great Depression. Now imagine at that time, governments were trying to put people back in their jobs and spending and so on and so forth, but they didn't have an idea of how the economy was operating. Basically politicians would open a window, look at the main square and say, how many people are shopping? And you say, I don't know, 20, 30. Is that a good sign or a bad sign? And that was more or less the type of indicators that they had. So that's why, like they invented GDP. And this was right before something else that was about to happen. the Second World War. So they invented GDP as a measure of how many things are being produced in an economy. And then the Second World War in 1939 gave them an opportunity to put it to work. Because when you wage a war, you want to know how much production you can afford. That's what you want, right? It's like you know, if you're leading a soccer team, you want to know how much your players can run, in a sense, right? So an idea of production was really important for the war. And the Americans that were taking the lead on the invention of GDP used it to plan the war. And America was the only country involved in the war that never, in the 5 years of the conflict, experienced a recession. Actually, the economy in the United States was getting better and better because of the war. Because of this idea of planning the war by measuring how much you can produce and trying to plan your objectives accordingly. Somebody didn't do that. Somebody didn't have GDP. This guy here didn't have GDP. So this guy here wanted to win the war through speeches, getting upset with the microphone and shouting. But you don't win a war through shouting. And had he not been defeated militarily, and this is part of economic history these days, had he not been defeated militarily, he would have been defeated economically anyway, because the German economy could not afford the war. The German economy was being squeezed in order to follow Hitler's orders that were totally disconnected. He had no idea of how you could measure production and consumption in the economy. So GDP was really important for the Americans to win the war. And this is why among economists, we usually refer to the invention of GDP like the Manhattan Project of economics. GDP, and here I stand by my words, was just as important to the Americans to win the war as the invention of the nuclear bomb. It allowed them to outpace all other parties involved in the war, in a way that gave them strength to continue the war indefinitely. I mean, nobody knew that the war would end in 1945, so you need to plan it carefully. And the Americans used GDP for that. And at the same time, they were the only economy that was actually full of money and capacity to spend and consume at the end of the war. And this explains also why America became the superpower it became after that. In 1944, I don't know if you've ever seen this picture. This is a hotel in New Hampshire, in a locality, in a place called Bretton Woods. You must have heard of this, at least students, and I presume none of you were born back then, but you must have read it in history books. In 22 days at Bretton Woods, they redesigned global economy. And one important thing that they did was to say, all the countries that are going to side with America will have to use GDP as their way of measuring progress in the economy. And this, was the first standardization of one measurement across different economies to say, this is what you have to do. Regardless of whether you're left or right, you have to increase GDP as your way of being part of this new system. And who wasn't part of that system were the Soviets. Now we are in the end of the 1940s, early 1950s, and what happens? It's what we call the Cold War. Now here again, GDP was a driving force behind the Cold War. Why? If you think about the fight between capitalism and communism, what was really about? It was about the moon landing on the moon landing. It was about, the arms race. It was really, the bottom line was which economic system was better at building prosperity, right? So this was the fight between communism and capitalism. But what if you measure prosperity in two different terms? So the capitalists were measuring prosperity in GDP terms, and the socialists were measuring prosperity with another measurement. So one guy said, I'm good, and the other guy said, no, I'm better because I measure myself differently. The other guy said, no, but that measurement sucks. And my measurement is much better. So this whole fight went on for 30 years. And guess who were the best experts of the Soviet economy and the Soviet measurements of prosperity in the United States? These guys here, the CIA, right? When you think of the CIA, you think of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt's movie, right? Mr. and Mrs. Smith, good-looking, speaking different languages, good at martial arts and guns and so on and so forth. You think of 007. Well, what if I tell you that 50% of the staff of the CIA in the 1960s were statisticians? Were not the spies. Or were spies, but spies in new numbers. These were people with dandruff, double glasses, sitting at their desks and compiling sheets of information coming from the Soviet Union to dispute the validity of what the Soviets were arguing regarding their economy. To say, the Soviets look good, but if you measure them in our terms, according to GDP, they look terrible. So GDP was used as in this campaign of reciprocal defamation, or to discredit which system, in this case the communist system, and its capacity to really generate economic growth. Because remember, bottom line, economic growth doesn't really exist. You cannot say, here's growth, here it isn't. It depends on how you measure it. You know, in one case it's growth, but for another measurement it could not be growth. It could be something totally different. And I'll show you this because I measure growth in a very different way, and there will be some surprises. So, and what happens is that eventually the Soviets give up. And they say, you know what, actually this GDP is turning out to be better than our measurements, and actually it's turning out to be to our advantage because we need a measurement that it is able to inflate some of our new sectors, especially in the service industry and so on and so forth. So in May 1989, the Soviets give up and say, please, okay, we're not going to measure growth in our own terms, teach us how to measure GDP. This is on the 10th of May 1989. They fly to the CIA in Virginia, United States. They get trained, 3 weeks, go back, start measuring GDP. What happens on the 9th, well, only a few months later, on the 9th of November 1989? Communism is gone, right? So the wall comes down, 6 months into GDP and communism is gone. So GDP managed to do what nothing else had managed to do, to destroy communism in 6 months. So it was a very powerful instrument, a very good one. And ever since, this is the phase in which GDP becomes, now GDP finally becomes the commonly accepted measure of prosperity and success all over the world. The communists embrace GDP. Think of a country that doesn't use GDP. Nowadays, all countries around the world use GDP. Even if you're thinking of exotic countries where I work, actually like Bhutan, they do use GDP. And I'm not sure about North Korea, but nobody's sure about North Korea anyway. So, but all other countries use GDP as their, the light, the beacon, what they have to follow in order to become successful. And this is a phase, for instance, in which our much beloved European Union decided to champion GDP to the point that it's the first regional organization in the world that has integrated GDP in our treaty with the Stability and Growth Pact in 1992. What did they do? They said GDP becomes one of our key parameters to decide the countries that can be part of the European Union and those that cannot, and also the policies that you can afford. Okay, so it's the first time. So ask the Greeks. The Greeks are really upset because of their GDP and because of their loss of GDP. Now they have to obey rules that they haven't chosen. So democracy is secondary to GDP. The same is applied to the Irish, the same is applied to the Portuguese, the same is applied to the Italians. It didn't apply to Germany, but that's another story. We can have probably why when Germany went through a crisis, GDP did not matter there. The International Monetary Fund went out there to tell the rest of the world how you increase GDP, and if you don't increase GDP, remember the IMF will come to you, will take your government out, and they will start ruling the country on your behalf. And so did the World Bank in many developing countries. If you think about what the G7 is, you had a summit just a few months ago in Germany, and the G7 is a summit of GDP countries. The reason why you become a member of the G7 is because of your GDP. So GDP is not just something nice that you may use or not. If your GDP is good enough, you get to become part of the powerful clubs of the world. The same applies to the G20, which now includes many emerging economies. Again, you become a member of the G20 based on your GDP. You become a member of new formations, probably this you've never heard of, like the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. A new formation among developing economies that is also based on GDP. These countries have been selected on their GDP. In 1999, when you and I were having a party, celebrating the end of the millennium, I presume all of you were already born by then, right? Unless you're 15. So you were celebrating and dancing and so on and so forth, oblivious of what was going on. The United States government was celebrating GDP as the greatest invention of the 20th century. You can check it online. It's publicly available. It's part of history. And the reason why they were celebrating GDP makes a lot of sense. They were celebrating GDP because GDP, as it did during the war and as it did at the end of the Cold War, it managed, under the Reagan screen, to basically standardize all economies. Nowadays, all economies look more or less the same. They pursue the same objectives, they pursue the same values, they do the same things, whether the government is socialist or capitalist, whether the government is left-wing or right-wing, they do all the same. So they realize, we invested so much on the Cold War, on espionage, and so on and so forth. Actually, GDP did the job for us. Did the job because by using a measurement that is the same all over the world, what happens? We do the same things. Because what you measure affects what you do. If you measure students in a certain way, students will start behaving like the measurement, like they are going to pursue what is in the measurement. So, the new phase, however, the new millennium, came also with a bit of a cold shower, or a warm shower. You know, we got to know more about climate change. We got to know more about the CO2 emissions that are due to GDP growth. We got to know more about the environmental pollution that comes out of this model of industrialization that GDP supports. We got to know more about the social costs of GDP, of the type of growth that GDP supports. So this kind of created some criticism and some doubts. And then came another thing, the 2008 financial crisis with the recession. Because that also was caused by our obsession with growing GDP. If you think about it, remember what caused the crisis was the indebtedness of consumers in the United States that bought too many houses they couldn't afford. But what is that triggered? Just now, rewind to these. Remember Bill Clinton? We celebrated Mr. Clinton and so on and so forth because those were years of high economic growth. What is that created that growth in the first place? The indebtedness of those people that were buying a house. So we told them to buy a house to increase GDP, and then a few years later we realized that that actually was just creating the bubble that would have burst and created the crisis we're still paying the price for. So the obsession with increasing GDP that puts people to spend more, because that's the only thing that counts for growth, that also created the conditions whereby we, in 2008, faced the global financial crisis. Now, let me show you something. You may say, oh, you know, this man has written a book about GDP. He's now trying to convince us that GDP is so important because he wants to sell the book. By the way, they're for free, because otherwise they would increase GDP if I sold them to you. And now he's telling us all the story about GDP, but it's actually not true. GDP is just a number. Forget it. Now let's see at least, if it's a number, you want to see how popular it is in our public discourse. I've done a test, and you can redo it. When I lived in the United States, I did a test from the US. I Googled the acronym GDP on Google. Put inverted commas and say GDP, just the acronym. And it gave me 36 million hits. This is a few years back, okay? So probably it has grown by now. 36 million websites talk about GDP. Now you may say, is that a lot or is it too little? Let's compare it to something else. Let's compare it to human development. It gave me 5 million hits. 5 million websites talked about human development, which is something you and I understand. GDP we don't understand, and yet it's so popular. Human development, which we understand, only gives me 5 million hits. Honesty, 21 million hits. Well-being, 27 million hits. Climate change, you would say, uh-oh, wait a minute, this is super popular. Climate change, look at the bear. 29 million hits. So, the web, the internet, talks about GDP more than it does about climate change. But of course, GDP is not the most popular. It's defeated by democracy. An old-fashioned concept, but still popular around the next. But only by 1 million hits. So there's only 1 million websites that talk about democracy more than GDP. Happiness, of course, 74 million hits. Freedom, very important concept, 165 million hits. And what is the most popular thing on the internet? Loud, remember, loud, I cannot hear you well. What is the most popular thing on the internet? Sex. Usually, you know, this is interesting. straight to sex. Sex. Here, you even said porn. So it's interesting how it goes. But let's assume for now that the most popular thing is sex. Okay? Sex gave me 790 dollars. But you see, we say, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. But this means basically that for 20 people that are checking sex on the internet, there's one idiot checking GDP. That's what it means. Okay? And that puts everything into perspective. And alongside this is a graph taken from Google Books. Look, GDP, here's up until the 1950s, of course, the 1960s. GDP was not part of our books because it didn't even exist, it barely existed, it had different, it's very recent. And yet, look, it's so common nowadays. There are so many books about GDP, more books about GDP than books about corruption, inequality, economic growth, governance, climate change, well-being, gender equality. Okay, there are more books about GDP than all these important things. So this proves, to a certain extent, my argument that GDP is much more important and powerful than you think. And in a sense, GDP growth is the new normal. GDP growth is our new religion, if you will. It's what is accepted by everybody. That's the way it is. That's what we have to do. It's not questioned. Or you may say it's more and more questioned among certain people in certain circles, but by and large, it's become our new God. But what is this magical number? Okay, and here's the only question. People wake up. Here's the equation. Okay, so this is just to say GDP is just a sum. GDP is a sum of consumption, how many things we buy. It's a sum of how much our government spends. It's how much our business invests, G the government, plus how much we export to other people. And that minus what we import from other people, right? So this is our gross domestic product, okay? It's simply a sum of what? It's a sum of money. It's a sum of money transactions. Interestingly, it works like this. If Doug sells me his pen, GDP goes ding, 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 and registers the transaction, let's say for €1. I don't like it anymore, I sell it back to him. It's the same pen. It still counts as another transaction. So the more we sell things back and forth, the more we make the money circulate in the economy. Even if we're not creating any real value, the more we do that, the more GDP grows. And it does so by basically measuring, counting the price tags, the things that come across, right? This t-shirt has a price. And that's GDP in terms of its price. So as a consequence, let me give you a few examples. This generates evident paradoxes. I'll have two options. When you have kids, Dirk, you will have a kid in a few months, so this will apply to you too. So you can say, what, you pay a babysitter, legally, hopefully, openly, to stay with your kids, and you go to work. GDP grows twice, because you go to work, you have transactions, ding, 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 look, the person looking after your children gets paid, so GDP grows again. Okay, but if I decide to spend time with my kids, GDP doesn't grow actually, I become GDP criminal, because I don't go to work, so I'm not earning money, I'm just spending time with my kids. I do what the babysitter would do, probably even better, and yet I don't pay the babysitter, so GDP doesn't take that into account at all. You may have two options, if you can decide to grow your own food, or part of your food in your own backyard, in your community, in the church, in your association, and you know what you're doing, you know what you're growing, and so on and so forth. Or you can go to a local supermarket and buy something which is being produced by somebody else, put in a lot of plastic, as much plastic as possible, because each layer of plastic is another transaction. And when you do that, of course, in the first case, GDP doesn't grow. In the second case, GDP grows, and grows a lot. But that's why your governments, you wonder, why do your governments want you to spend? Many governments don't even know why you're spending. They just know that if you spend, GDP goes up, and they get reelected. If you do not spend, GDP doesn't go up, and the IMF will come. That's what they know. There's another, thing which is becoming much more popular these days. If I do this with my partner, right? And I hope that many of you do this. GDP doesn't go up. But if I do this, GDP does go up. Okay, you may say, oh, this is a stupid joke. It's not a stupid joke at all. The European Union has just introduced new regulations a few months ago that make sure that our statisticians count how much money is being spent on prostitution, how much money is being spent on drugs, so that that can be added to our GDP, so that European economies don't look as bad as they may look. You don't believe me? Well, here is the evidence. So we got to the point of trying to win the GDP race by starting to include things that you would say maybe shouldn't be part of how good an economy is. Because our politicians, all they want is to show the world that Europe is not so, in so much trouble, because we spend a lot of money on paying for sex and drugs. And that, in a sense, should be part of how good our economies are. Okay, so everything that is public, that is openly accessible, doesn't count for GDP. Only what is fenced. So if you have public parks in your city where people can go for free, they did not add to the economy. To add to the economy, you have to fence them and make people pay a ticket to get in. Only then do they count as part of your economy. If you grow a tree, it doesn't count towards GDP. But if you chop it, it does. You chop it by chopping it, you have to spend money. And if you chop it and sell it to IKEA or whatever, then it counts even more. But if you grow trees, if your government is growing trees, the economy will not see any bump into its trends. What is new counts towards GDP, what is used doesn't. So if you recycle, if you resell, whenever you do that, forget it. The statisticians will never take that into account as part of your economic growth. And whatever comes for free, air, the environment, doesn't count for GDP at all. So the only way to make it count is to dilute it. This is why, for the many different reasons, that I'm trying to change the names. As I said, Goldilocks problem, gross domestic problem, but also you can call it the global debt-based Ponzi scheme. I don't know if you know what a Ponzi scheme is, but Ponzi became pretty famous with Bernie Madoff in 2008. Remember, the guy that sold investment plans to people and took the money himself? And all you have to do is to make sure nobody wants the money back. From a Ponzi scheme works, she gives me the money, and then I give her the money back a little bit, so that she goes like, wow, what a return on the investment. She doesn't know it's her money I'm giving her back. And she goes to him, and she says, hey, Professor Fioramonti, it's really good. Invest your money that way. The more people invest, the more I give them the money back. One by one, they think they're earning money because they do not know that that's their own money that is disappearing in my pockets. Well, GDP does more or less the same. How was the crisis in the United States created? It was people that took out a loan on their house. That's their house. They took out a loan and they thought, oh, wait a minute, I have money now. Well, it's not money, it's debt. The debt got sliced and sold to other people. And for as much as you can do this, as long as you can do that, the economy keeps going. Because you're not generating wealth, you're simply taking something on your own home. Then other people believe that that is a good investment and continue doing that. If you stop the process, the whole Ponzi scheme collapses, right? And this is what happened with the crisis, but the same applies to GDP. Instead of a home, we have Mother Nature providing us with a lot of services for free. And then what do? We extract these things, we monetize them, we put them into GDP, and we call it economic growth. But we're not growing anything. We're just taking something from somebody who's so stupid to give it to us for free, and then selling it to other people, saying, oh, how good we are that we are actually generating wealth. So, in a sense, GDP is more or less like what you do when you sell your organs. Right? Like this guy. He has to pay for tuition, he's selling his kidney. The kidney has got no value. What is the value of the kidney? Nothing, right? But tuition, you need money for tuition. Where are these guys playing cards here? So that's what they do. You sell something. If I sell my kidney and they give me 100,000 euros, GDP accounts for 100,000 euros. If I give my kidney here, GDP doesn't move. And if I get the 100,000 euros, I think I'm wealthy. I have 100,000 euros. And maybe I sell something else, and then something else, and then something else. Only when I come to the point of having to cure myself, I realize, my God, that was a bad deal. Because now I have to spend so much money, even if I can still save myself, spend so much money to recreate what I've sold. And it may very well be much more expensive than all the money that I made out of selling. And this is why the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is not the WWF, it's not Pope Francis, it's not Greenpeace, it's mainstream economic rationale representing the richest governments in the world, says if there was a controversial item from the statistics world, GDP is it. It measures income, but not equality. It measures growth, but not destruction. And it ignores the values like social cohesion and the environment. And here's the important thing. Yet government, businesses, and probably most people swear by it. So what happened in 1977? In 1977, I was born. Now you must say, so what? What's the story here? So why are you telling me this? Well, because my research, the research that I do with other people, including the former chief statistician of the OECD, some of the leading ecological economists in the world, it shows, maybe that's the reason why I got so interested in the GDP, but I learned it only afterwards, that 1977 is also the time, sorry, 3 times. I was only born once, though. So, it's also the time when our GDP growth, got disconnected, decoupled itself from progress, if you will. We measure progress in terms of genuine progress. We try to understand the costs of certain things and deduct the costs from growth. So if GDP growth is out of increasing traffic jams, because a traffic jam basically increases growth, right? You're standing in your car, you're listening to the radio, you're eating something, you're probably getting upset, maybe you have a car accident. Ideally, you should have maybe 2 car accidents, kill somebody, because every time you do that, there is an ambulance that will come, there is a doctor that will have to be paid, there is an insurance that will pay out some money, and so on and so forth. And GDP loves that. GDP loves accidents and all of that. So when you start deducting the costs of these things from GDP growth, this is what happens. The dark black curve is GDP growth. The other one is the genuine progress. So if you start deducting the costs, in 1977, our growth started going down. We were spending much more on traffic jams and on divorces and so on and so forth than we were doing on growth. Ideally, the perfect GDP man for our society would be a guy who was in a traffic jam, speaking on his cell phone, eating a hamburger, and speaking to his lawyer who's organizing his divorce, while the kids are being looked after by a babysitter who's on drugs and ideally also a prostitute. That would be perfect. That would be like the GDP paradox. Okay. These are all things, nowadays in Europe at least, that count towards economic prosperity. But if this guy is walking to pick up the kids at school, or maybe jogging, and he's not talking on the phone because he doesn't have a phone, or keeps the phone off, and if he's walking in a public park in which he doesn't have to pay a ticket, all these things do not count as economic prosperity. To the contrary, your country may suffer. Yeah, I'm knock on the door and say to your Prime Minister, what's wrong with Austria? What's wrong with you that you still have public parks and people can walk around free? You are backward. So, but if you're looking at this, so again, here's when I'm born. You will agree that I was extremely good looking at it. And I'm the one on this side. The other one is obviously Snoopy. And here's, I've never seen these 2 guys. Historically, they tell us that the time when Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan ruled, respectively, the UK and the US, those were times of high economic growth, right? Because they look at the GDP curve, and it's true. Maggie and Ronnie were really good at increasing the economic growth in GDP terms. But most of this growth was traffic jams, divorces, people killing themselves, and so on and so forth. When you start deducting the costs of that crap out of GDP growth, these 2 guys presided over one of the worst periods in the real, if you will, good growth of the world. So how history changes when you change in the numbers. Here's the saying: when you deduct only, forget about divorces, forget about drugs, only the environmental damage generated directly by GDP growth, industrialization, and other things. You're not saying you shouldn't do it. You simply take the money and you discount, you deduct it from growth, because it's something that you wouldn't want, ideally. That's what happens. Again, that's me. In 1977, look at that curve. It goes down. It becomes our global growth flattens. We haven't grown 1 penny ever since I was born. Can you believe it? In spite of me being here, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So this is another graph that shows the same. Our GDP growth, same graph, has been going down while our planet was giving things for free and we were simply taking resources and wealth away from the planet. We haven't created anything. We just stole the silver from the planet. It's like you have an old granny at home and she has some money and she kept the money there and she kept some silver, family silver, for so long. And then you come in and you say, Gran, look around the window, look out of the window, there's a donkey that wants to talk to you. And she's so stupid to believe. And while she's looking outside the window, you steal the silver. You go out there and you sell it, and then you come and say, I'm such a great entrepreneur. That's basically what GDP does. And the only thing that GDP does very well is to generate emissions. So these are two curves of CO2 emissions and GDP growth from the 90s on. And you see perfect correlation. Only in 2008, during the crisis, both of them go down at the same time. Who have been the champions of GDP in history, in recent history? Have you ever seen this island? Well, the picture doesn't say much. This island is in the Pacific, and it's called Nauru. Okay, this is a beautiful island that in the 1960s was a beautiful paradise. People would go there and study, the coral reefs and so on and so forth. Then what happened? Somebody started pooing on the island. Okay, the birds. And they realized that actually birds' poo produces phosphates. And phosphates are important things for GDP because you can make a lot of things out of phosphates. You can make soaps, you can make chemicals for the car industry, and so on and so forth. So the Naurans immediately said, oh, we got a chance to increase our GDP. They started digging and, digging holes and taking everything out until Nauru in the 1980s became, guess what? The richest country in the world. The per capita GDP of Nauru was much higher than that of the United States in the 1980s. It became the richest country in the world. We should all go to Nauru. This was in the 1980s, but just as I said, selling your organs, one day you feel rich. A day later, you feel the consequences of it. So, one of the champions of obesity, the capital city of diabetes around the world. And nowadays, Nauru has got nothing left. It is so poor that basically there is no economic activity going on in Nauru. Only a few years later. The only economic activity going on there is a prison for refugees that Australians built on Nauru, and they're paying for it because they don't want to keep the refugees in Australia. And here's Nauru today. Everything is gone. It's just a desert. Another interesting example is California. California, according to GDP, up until the mid-90s, was the 6th largest economy in the world. If it was had been a country, it would have been part of the G7. Because it's bigger, its economy was bigger than that of Canada and Italy, are two members of the G7. You have seen pictures like this, Beverly Hills, Hollywood, and so on and so forth, so much wealth. And yet, look at what's happening in California. California is paying the price of that, is paying the price of policies that were only aimed at increasing short-term wealth. And now it's paying the price of climate change. This is a picture taken before, and now after the drought. This is before and after the drought. This is before and after the drought. California is one of the wealthiest places in the world in GDP terms, that people don't have enough water coming out of the tap. Right? They have to ration water. One day you drink, one day I drink. You don't drink too much, because otherwise I'm going to be very thirsty. Right? This is California. Another one is China. You probably have heard all the time about the Chinese miracle, that China took people out of poverty, that China is a great place, and so on and so forth. This is the miracle that I've seen in China. The Chinese are wearing masks. They even wear masks. The other day I was walking down in Salzkammergut. Honestly, Salzkammergut is a lovely place. GDP almost doesn't move there. This is also free. Even the cows seem so happy. I wonder whether they even probably they live happily without anybody milking them. I don't know. But then I saw a Chinese tourist. And guess what? In Salzkammergut, Wolfgangsee, with a mask. Like, don't worry, this is not China. Here you can breathe. Don't worry. But they're so used to this that even there. And here, look, this is the fastest train in the world. It's in China. But a lot of people miss the train because they cannot see it. It's like it's so fast and the visibility is so low. And these are some of the best apartments in China, but the view is not really great. So, and here is a picture taken from the satellite of China. This is the miracle. This is the miracle that China's gone through. And look at this. This is the Lancet, the most important medical journal in the world. In the global burden of the sea study, it says 1.2 million people die in China every year for pollution-related costs. The World Bank is estimating that China will need to spend at least $9 billion per year just to clean up the air. Apocalypse. Have you ever heard of the term? People are leaving, especially the foreigners who can, are leaving China in spite of the lucrative salaries that they earn there because kids cannot breathe anymore. And they're sick and tired of having to check what is the level of particulate in the air every day before sending their kids to school. And this is an interview that I had for the book with the Deputy Minister of the Environment, Pang Yue. And he said, this miracle will end soon because the environment can no longer keep pace. And according to his own research, he argues that environmental damage has cost China 8 to 15% of its GDP per year, without considering the depletion of resources. Basically, his conclusion is that our country has lost almost everything it has gained since the late 1970s due to pollution. Okay, so since Deng Xiaoping introduced market reforms in China that created the wealth we've celebrated, and the economists and everybody else, all these magazines have celebrated for so long, it was just like Nauru. You're rich today just because you have to pay the debt one day. And now the debt is being paid. And as I said, the economists have so many times celebrated China, but now the great fall of China. I love The Economist because The Economist is the only magazine in the world that can say one thing today and the very opposite tomorrow, and people still buy the magazine. It's a lovely job. I mean, I wish I had that job. You can say whatever you want, you make money out of it. So, but the good news is that shift happens, right? So things are changing, as also Dick mentioned during his introduction. Remember this man? We forgot about him, thank God. I'm told he may come back. Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president of France, he was the one to launch the first commission, headed by a couple of people that I know, like Martin Sen and Joe Stiglitz that I work with, that, for the first time put the issue on the agenda, saying GDP sucks, GDP is not working, we have to actually change this system. We have to go beyond GDP. David Cameron said, no, there's a problem too. Let's measure well-being. Even Obama at some point said, we need to do something. And this man, Ban Ki-moon, was the only honestly trying to do something, but he's only the Secretary General of the UN, so it doesn't count anything. And he's the one that says, our system is broken. We need a new paradigm. We need a new economic paradigm that moves beyond GDP. And here are some examples of what's being done in the world. The alternatives. Nowadays, there is consensus, even at the World Bank, at the European Union level, at the OECD, that GDP has to be reformed. There are many different alternatives. I'm not going to mention them because it gets boring. But you may, if you want to have more information, I can tell you. Some of them try to change and improve GDP. Some of them try to replace GDP, saying GDP cannot be improved. You just have to have something totally different to measure economic prosperity. Whether it's well-being, whether it's our beloved King of Bhutan, or other measures. The OECD has a new indicator called Your Better Life that says, in this caption there, it says, there is more to life than the cold numbers of GDP and economic statistics. And it measures things like housing, community, education, civic engagement, health, as parts of a strong economy. The General Progress Indicator is something that has been launched in the United States. It's the one that I've used for the graph. Remember when I mentioned Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan? That basically says, well, let's keep measuring GDP, but at least let's start deducting, subtracting the bad things that come with GDP. You cannot tell me that a good country, a good economy is an economy in which there are so many divorces because lawyers have to be paid. A divorce is something that should count against the economy, right? A traffic jam is something that should count against the economy. If, if you get killed, you should count against the economy. You cannot want to increase murders. You cannot want to increase traffic jams or accidents. You cannot want to increase divorces. So these are things that a good economy should avoid and should make, if anything, money out of something else. So it says, which are the economies that make money out of something else? And you've seen the results. Interestingly, as I told you, everything we do that doesn't have a price tag doesn't count for GDP. So how many of you, can you raise your hands, how many of you have got kids? Don't be afraid. Kids don't bite. So how many of you, whether men or women, hopefully in equal numbers, have taken maternity or paternity leave? Altenside. How many of you have used Altenside? Only 2, 3. My God. Oh, no, more. Don't be shy. Let me tell you something. For GDP, the time you spent raising your kids was wasted. You should be punished for having that. Right? But now we're realizing more and more that actually, if we do not do this, our economies wouldn't even be operating. If we do not take care of our kids, if we don't do so many things at home that do not count for GDP, all of a sudden our economies wouldn't be able to operate. And what happens if we start calculating what would be the economic contribution of housewives, or house husbands, mothers, and fathers to the economy? It's interesting. Here, it's a study done by the OECD. From Hungary, in Hungary, which is the lowest level, at least 40% of the economy is based at home. So if you were to measure what housewives and house husbands do, they would count more and more, much more than many enterprises and many companies. They contribute to the economy much more than many companies. If you go to the UK, almost 80% of the economy is at home. And yet, this economy is disregarded by GDP. But if you consider the value of it, if you think for a second how much it would cost for the entire economy to pay for all the services that moms and dads provide for free. And it would basically destroy the economy, because 80% of it is mom and dad. It's based on mom's work and dad's work. So we need to change our understanding of economic growth, because we have to start considering the things we do at home, the work we do in our communities, as fundamental components of our economy. And the same applies to nature. This is a study done by the United Nations, and it shows that all countries in the study, 20 countries, they're growing their GDP, you see the gray columns, at the expense of their natural resources, the natural capital. Okay, so what I said about the debt, the Ponzi scheme, remember, taking from Mother Earth, creating GDP and not giving anything back to Mother Earth, is happening. We are all building our economies in non-replaceable capital that is not going to come back again. Just like in China, just like in Nauru, just like California. We're simply postponing the day of reckoning, the moment in which Mother Nature will call us back and say, here's the bill, who pays? The good news is that more and more people are aware of this. More and more, even companies are aware of this. More and more actors, as you know, like people in society, powerful people, and so on and so forth. So we are starting to shift towards a well-being economy, towards the idea that we shouldn't try and measure GDP, because GDP doesn't measure what we ultimately want, which is well-being. Right? What is an economy for? It's to increase well-being. Does GDP measure well-being? Not at all. It often measures the opposite of well-being. So why don't we start measuring well-being and trying to design our economy so that it can increase well-being? In the United States, several states, not the country, but several states, Vermont, Maryland, and Massachusetts, have introduced measures of genuine progress. This is from the website of the government of the state of Maryland. Even the European Commission, after introducing the prostitution, sex, and drugs, and so on and so forth, decided, okay, well, maybe it's time also to start measuring progress, but the real progress. In Paraguay, the government has decided that well-being will be the GDP of the country. They will stop measuring GDP, or relegating GDP to another level, and measuring well-being. In Bolivia, the government has done something similar, introducing measures that try to respect the value of nature. In Ecuador, they put in the constitution that a certain portion of the forest could not be touched, no matter what. In Bhutan, they've done the same. Even in China, they're realizing that there is a major problem. Now we know that the Chinese were so desperate to show the world that they were doing so good because of the economists and what economists and the economists were saying, that they inflated their GDP numbers. That they simply said, one day there was a guy in front of a computer who said, hey, Mr. President, today GDP is down by 2%. And somebody told him, put it up by 3. Nobody checks these figures. Nobody knows what these figures say. You can fake them anytime you want. And so they did it. Even the president, the governor of the Reserve Bank of China, the central bank, admitted that their GDP for the past 10 years has been man-made. So there were people simply changing it. And in the interim, all of us were celebrating China. They said, China is so good, we should do like China. And the economists, again, celebrating the Chinese miracle. But the Chinese government realized that this is a problem. They started introducing now a green GDP, in which they're trying to measure what is the real GDP of the country if you start considering the environmental destruction. And the country that the president, Xi Jinping, has said last year that politicians should no longer pursue GDP growth as their target. This is the president of the Communist People's Republic of China. Okay? He said, our obsession is to come to an end. And this is taken, by the way, from their own websites. News of the Communist Party of China. Okay? Again, it's not taken from Greenpeace or anything else. It's taken from their own official websites. And 70 cities in China, including Shanghai, in 2014 have decided to stop measuring GDP because it's taking them off track. It's distracting them and making them do what they shouldn't do. Now they've realized that. And by the way, this article is from the Financial Times. Okay, all my sources are carefully selected. And at the same time, this is a change that is happening at the top level. But there's a lot of change happening from the bottom up, like people in this room. And there's a lot of change here because I think our temperature is hitting like 70 degrees. I'm sweating, and I think a lot of people I see doing this. So like there's a lot of energy in this room. More and more people are scared about the end of energy, the end of conventional fossil fuel energy. More and more people, probably more and more of you must have heard of this word, degrowth, Postwachstum in German. You must have seen something because these days it's becoming more and more popular that growth is a fetish, something that is taking us in the wrong direction. More and more local communities are becoming transition initiatives. I don't know if you have heard of the transition tax. And more and more people are becoming prosumers. You know what a prosumer is? You're not a consumer. That's the other thing that GDP did. It made us all consumers. Like we became consumers. You know what the word consumer comes from? It comes from the study of TB, tuberculosis, right? Because that's what the bacteria do to an organism. They consume it to death. And we have taken that term, consuming something, and it became like, oh, a consumer. I'm so proud of being a consumer. Rather than saying, wait a minute, I'm a citizen. I'm a human being. I'm not a consumer. We have accepted that. So many people saying, well, let's stop being consumers and let's produce and consume ourselves without having the separation between those who produce and those who consume. Like informal flea markets where people sell their own products are becoming more and more common, not just in Europe, but also in other parts of the world, or making your own energy. Other things that don't count for GDP. If you buy energy, it counts for GDP, but if you make your own, it doesn't. And this is a picture from Germany, one from Vietnam, and one from South Africa. So it's becoming more and more common. These are transition initiatives around the world. More and more people are doing something which is even more radical. And I'm told Austria has a lot of experiences in this. They're rethinking money. They're realizing that there's something fundamentally wrong with our money system, which is based on that. And it makes us totally unable to control it. And they're rethinking money one way or another by introducing local, alternative, complementary currencies that are often, you can only confined to certain localities, so they don't move, and they're not based on inflation and debt, so they cannot actually grow in value. Even examples like Bitcoin, with all the ups and downs and the risks associated with it, is an interesting case of how people can get together and challenge conventional views on global economic governance by creating a cryptocurrency. And this is another interview I had with Paul Glover from one of the leading alternative currencies in the United States. And he says, national currencies are crumbling because they're all in debt with nature. Since modern human economies extract from nature faster than they replenish, local currencies are capable of reconnecting our economies to our planet. You must have heard of an initiative called Stop TTIP. It was a European citizen-led legislative initiative that just completed and collected more than 2.5 million signatures against the planned free trade agreement between Europe and the United States. You must have heard of movements against, like in this case, these are First Nations in Canada against the tar sands, against the new explorations in the tar sands. These are movements against austerity. We are launching a no GDP campaign. You know why? Because the GDP is what justifies all the bad things we're fighting against. GDP is what's causing climate change. GDP is what is causing austerity. If we were to challenge GDP, the Greeks, the Portuguese, many others would probably have to suffer much less, or not suffer at all. If we were to challenge GDP, the tar sands would make no sense, because the tar sands create more loss than the money that they promised to produce. And this is what we need to do, to start moving towards a global civil society campaign against GDP. By doing this, we're reconnecting a lot of different initiatives in civil society and finding the fact, discovering the point, highlighting the fact that all the bad things, or most of the bad things, we're all individually and separately fighting against have a common enemy. That is the GDP that makes conventional economic thinking around growth acceptable, and the alternatives that we all produce every day not acceptable. So thank you so much. These are two of my books, and there's also my email somewhere, my Twitter account. If you disagree with me and if you want to take it personally, you can find me on the internet. I'm usually told that I'm a fascist, I'm a communist, I don't believe in God, I'm a religious leader, all the opposites. So there's one, you go from one extreme to the next, all possible accusations. So if you disagree with me, just go and comment on my web pages and increase the number of enemies that I make. Thanks a lot.